Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us today at African Matters. My name is Mona Davids. I am a board member of African Matters. Joining us today for our emergency rental assistance program, we have Mr. Jordan Dubray. Apologies, Jordan, if I said your surname wrong. From BronxWorks, Mr. Dubray is a housing attorney. And then also at some point during our program, most likely at the end, we will be joined by Mr. Muhammad Mader, who is the chairman of the African Advisory Council of the Bronx Borough President's Office, as well as with Mr. Sadio Barry, who is also a board member of African Matters. I know it is 6 o'clock, and I know a lot of people want to get this workshop started. So Jordan, without delay, I'm going to hand everything over to you because I know people have questions. I hope that in the presentation, you at some point, you also may be able to respond to some concerns because people have been saying that the applications aren't moving quick enough, and there's been some stuff in the media regarding the program or delays. So hopefully you can somewhat address that if that's okay. Please let's move forward so that we can get our communities informed on how to apply for emergency rental assistance and also on getting help with submitting all of their documents. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. And Jordan, I leave it to you.
Thanks, Mona. Again, I'm Jordan Dubray. I'm a staff attorney with BronxWorks in the Bronx. And I'll be presenting on the New York State Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So again, there are a few emergency rental assistance programs throughout the US, but this one is covering the New York State one. And so let's dive right in. So what is ERAP? So you're going to hear ERAP a lot. It's the acronym for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And ERAP is a temporary program to pay rental arrears that have accumulated during the COVID-19 pandemic. Right now, it's the best answer for how the COVID rental arrears are going to get paid. There are several different ERAP programs throughout the United States. Each state has one. Pretty much each U.S. city with over 200,000 people has one. So if you're watching this and you're outside of New York State, you probably live somewhere that has their own ERAP program. We're not going to go into that, but we are going to go into the New York one. There were a couple different laws that went into effect federally, setting aside money from the U.S. Treasury Department to various states and localities to distribute to tenants, to distribute on behalf of tenants who qualified, who had rental arrears. In the state of New York, including state and local allocations, there was about $2.3 billion distributed federally, and then the state of New York added some additional funding as well. So the ERAP program is administered in New York by the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance. And in New York City, HRA, the Human Resources Administration, is overseeing the implementation of the city's ERAP plan in partnership with OTDA and another agency, HPD. And as far as application assistance and outreach and education, a variety of community-based organizations, I believe all nonprofits, have been contracted throughout the city to provide assistance with applications. So beyond this presentation, if you have questions regarding ERAP, there is a state hotline that's put in place by OTDA for answering questions. whether it's about the ERAP program in general or it's about a specific application, and that number is 1-844-NY1-RENT or 1-844-691-7368. It's available in a few languages. There's capability in a few languages. I believe they may have to call and get an interpreter on the line if you want a language other than English, but it is set up to help folks as far as any questions that they may have about the program. So who is eligible for ERAP? So there are some criteria that tenants have to meet to be eligible for ERAP. It's not just anyone, but it covers a lot of folks. And so to be eligible for ERAP, you have to have a household income at or below 80% of the area median income, or AMI for short, which that is a specific number depending on the household, the number of folks in the household. There's one amount for New York City, and then each county in the state of New York has different set amounts. We'll go more into that on one of the next slides. So that's the first part. The second is that the household has to have experienced a COVID-19 related financial hardship or have qualified for unemployment. The COVID-19 related financial hardship is interpreted very broadly. So it doesn't mean that you have to have lost your job. It doesn't mean that you have to have had COVID. We'll go into what they view as a financial hardship here in a bit. The third eligibility criteria is having a rent obligation at the tenant's primary residence that's overdue. So we'll go into what that means more as well. And then last, there has to be a demonstrated risk of experiencing housing instability and or homelessness. So I'm with BronxWorks. So this is going to be the AMI for the Bronx, but again, Westchester, the counties in Long Island, the counties throughout the rest of the state of New York have their own AMI calculated, because it is the average income or the median income for that county, or in the case of New York, for all 5 boroughs within New York. So for a household of 1, it's $66,850. Household of 4, it goes up to $95,450. Household of 5, $103,100. So as long as the household is at or below the 80% AMI, that's all of the income level that matters. Unfortunately, if the household is above that percentage, then that household would not qualify for ERAP. But again, if you're watching this and you're outside New York City, you may want to look up what the AMI is for this year for your county, because it could very well be lower or higher than this amount. So then the second thing that household has to qualify for eligibility is that on or after March 13th, 2020, a member of the household either received unemployment benefits or experienced a reduction in income or incurred significant costs, directly or indirectly, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So in New York, March 13th, 2020 is more or less the official date when everything shut down, when the state of emergency was declared. It's basically viewed as the start date for the pandemic, the official start date for the pandemic. So March 13th is the determinative date for a lot of this. But a reduction in income does not necessarily mean losing your job. It could be having your hours cut, and this is for any single person in the household, any one person, or a combination. So it doesn't have to be the person actually applying for ERAP, the primary applicant. It can be anyone in that household. So a reduction in income can be having hours cut, having wages cut, being furloughed, being sick and unable to work, having the business that you worked for shut down temporarily. But it doesn't just have to be a loss in income. It can also be an increase in costs. That increase in costs can be having to pay for medical expenses. That's an obvious one. But it can be something as minor as having to buy masks, having to buy gloves, having to buy PPE, having costs for kids staying home and doing remote learning, having costs for having to work from home and getting supplies for that, having an increase in costs of essential items, whether that's food, toilet paper, any of the essential items that that the price went up on, or even an increase in transportation costs. The subways were shut down for a little while, so perhaps you had to take a cab or an Uber when you would have taken a subway. So all of that can count as an increase in cost. So it's interpreted very, very widely. So then the third part, the rent obligation, there has to be overdue rent at the applicant's primary residence. So that means that if you're applying for emergency rental assistance for a specific residence, whether that's an apartment or a mobile home or whatever that happens to be, you actually have to still be living in it. So you will not be able to qualify if it's somewhere that you've moved out of, and it has to be your primary residence. So maybe if you're thinking about moving to another apartment, maybe keep the keys at your old apartment, maybe keep some of your stuff at the old apartment, and don't completely move out. And again, that rent has to be rent that was owed on or after March 13th of 2020. So then going on to the next slide, there has to be a risk of housing instability. This is a very easy criteria to satisfy. All that you have to have is overdue rent. And so if you have overdue rent at your apartment, you have a risk of housing instability. Immigration status does not matter for the purposes of ERAP, which is something that is very different from most government assistance programs. So anybody in the household, whether that's the primary applicant, whether that's just somebody living in there, it does not matter what immigration status is. You can be a citizen, you can be a permanent resident, you can be undocumented, you can be on a visitor's visa. It doesn't matter, and you can have mixed statuses within your household. ERAP is immigration status blind, and it's that is very different from most other rental assistance programs that were around before this, or most other government benefits programs that were around before this. So that's a big deal. So ERAP applications opened up June 1st, and in the first 30 days, there were different priority categories. And after the first 30 days, starting in July, it became first come, first serve as far as applications. Now there were so many applications that they are still reviewing some of those June applications. So if you applied in June, maybe if you weren't in one of the top priority lists, maybe they haven't finished reviewing your application yet. So it is still good to know, these priority categories. But there's 4 priority categories. Basically, I'm not going to go too in depth into them, but they looked at 2 things. What was the income for that household, and did they have any other factors that made them at a higher risk for losing their home, or a higher risk for being a higher need to be processed faster? So if you were at or below 50% AMI, you move to the top of the list, and if you had one of 7 risk factors, you really move to the absolute top of the list. And then other than that, it was folks that just had 50% AMI, but none of the additional factors. Below that, 80% AMI, so the income level that let you qualify for ERAP, and one of the risk factors. And then at the bottom was folks that just had an income that let them qualify for the program at or below 80% of the AMI. So those risk factors that bumped folks up to a higher priority category for their application getting reviewed first were folks that were unemployed for at least 90 days, or a veteran, or currently experiencing domestic violence, a survivor of human trafficking, having an open and active eviction case, residing in a mobile home, living in a community that was a zip code that was specifically designated by the state as being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, or living in a building of 20 or fewer units. And so, this goes through the other priority categories. But again, that was for June. Now applications are being reviewed in the order that they come in. So we've gone through the eligibility of ERAP. What does ERAP actually do? Well, if somebody is approved for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, they can get up to 12 months of rental arrears payments for rents accrued on or after March 13th, 2020. So if you have overdue rent that's been around for months that it was overdue since March 13th, 2020, you can get up to 12 of those months paid off by ERAP. It won't pay for anything before March 13th, 2020, and it will only pay for 12 months of past rent. Obviously, we're more than 12 months after March 2020, so it will pay up to 12 months, but not more than that. But it will pay up to 3 months of future rent if the household is expected to spend 30% or more of gross monthly income on rent. So here in New York City, that's almost everyone, but not quite everyone. So you do need to, run the numbers for what your household income is and what your rent is. But general rule of thumb, ask for 3 months of future rent, because it is money that you don't have to pay back. So that's another thing that's really good about ERAP. It's a grant. It's not a loan. Some other rental assistance programs that have been around for a little while are loans that you have to pay back. ERAP, you do not have to pay it back. It's essentially free money. I mean, it's taxpayer money, but it's free money to you that you don't have to pay back. In addition, as long as you have some amount of rental arrears, you can also get up to 12 months of electric or gas utility arrears paid off. Again, that has to be accrued on or after March 13th of 2020. It does not pay future utilities, and it does not pay utilities alone. So there has to be at least some amount of rental arrears that you owe in order to get the 12 months of utility arrears paid off. But in theory, you can get all of these. You can get 12 months of past rent, 3 months of future rent, and 12 months of past electric or gas utility payments, all covered by ERAP. So it's a very good program, and you don't have to pay any of it back. So who actually gets paid? So payments are made directly to the landlord / property owner and the utility company on the behalf of the tenant. So tenants don't get paid, but payments are made on the tenant's behalf. So if a tenant is approved, if a household is approved, they will get a notification that their application has been approved. If the money gets paid out, they'll get a notification that that money has been paid out, and that money goes direct deposit to the landlord or to the property or to the utility company. So the way it's set up is both tenants and landlords have to actually send in documents in order for the application to be successful. If a landlord refuses to do so, or if for whatever reason the folks reviewing the application can't get in contact with the landlord, if the tenant has done everything right on their end, they'll get what's called a provisional approval, and they'll get a letter saying, your application would be approved, except your landlord hasn't submitted their documents yet. We're waiting on the landlord to submit the documents. And then from that point, those funds will be, the funds that would be paid out will be held up for up to 180 days to allow time for the landlord to actually send in those documents. If at the end of 180 days the landlord hasn't done so, then those funds go back to the ERAP program. So before you start up an application, there are documents that that a renter needs to get together, and that is personal identification for the applicant and also for everyone in the household. The requirement for everyone in the household may be going away soon, but it's still there right now. The social security numbers for each household member who has a social security number. If they don't have a social security number, you would just put that that there is no social security number for that person. Proof of rental amount, that can be a signed lease, a money order, a rent receipt. Proof of residency and occupancy that is current, so within the past month. That can be a signed lease, that can be mail sent to you at that location that's within the last month. Proof of income for the prior month to the application being submitted, or last year's annual income, and that needs to be from every single household member. And that can be either pay stubs, W-2 tax documents. If you can't get it for anybody in your household, a self-attestation is allowed, which is literally somebody writing down on a piece of paper, this is how much money I made last month or last year, signing it and submitting that along with the application. And then if applying for utility arrears, a copy of the gas or electric utility bill. It should be each month going back to March 2020, but obviously you submit what you have. So those are the documents that are needed from the tenant applicant. The landlord also has to submit documents. That includes a tax form that's called a W-9. That basically gives all of the tax information, the official, all of the official sort of information for how the landlord is registered as far as their company, whatever that happens to be. An executed lease with the tenant applicant, or if there is no lease, a canceled check, or something that shows what the last full monthly rent payment was. Documentation of the rent due from the tenant, that can be a rent ledger, or it can be a landlord attestation. Banking information so they can actually receive the money via direct deposit, and signing an application form that states that everything is accurate. There are strings to the landlord accepting ERAP funds, and those are that the ERAP payment satisfies the tenant's full rental obligations for the time period covered by the payment. So whatever months that were approved by ERAP, the rent that was owed for those months is deemed to have been paid. If there were months where rent was owed that wasn't covered by ERAP, that is still outstanding. That isn't covered. Late fees are waived. The monthly rental amount is frozen for a year after receipt of the funds from ERAP. So that's obviously great for tenants. And there can't be one specific type of eviction case, which is called a holdover, which is a type of eviction case that can be brought if somebody's living in an apartment without a lease. Non-payment eviction cases still can be brought. There is an impact on housing court cases, and that is, again, the holdover eviction case can't be brought. But also, if there is an open housing court case, that case gets put on hold. There's sort of a mini eviction moratorium while that application is being reviewed. You, as a tenant, you would need to actually have documentation that you submitted an ERAP application, because you would actually have to show the court that, yes, there has been an ERAP application submitted in order for them to actually pause the case. Also, if a landlord decides they don't want to accept the money from the ERAP program, if there is a housing court case later, that can actually be used as a defense, and it will be, and whatever payment they would have been receiving from the ERAP program will be deemed to have been waived, because they were given the opportunity to get paid the rent, and they refused to accept the payment. So again, ERAP applications started June 1st. They are done entirely online, or if you don't have the ability to do it online, you can actually call the state hotline, which is 1-844-NY1-RENT. And in theory, you're able to do it over the phone, although as you'll see here in a bit, it's a little complicated. There's a lot of information, so doing it over the phone may not be your best bet. As of the end of July, there were 120,000 applications that had been submitted statewide. The last word that I heard was, as of last Friday, it's up to about 158,000. So there are a lot of folks that have been applying for this. So the actual application is, of course, online. It's at nysrenthelp.otda.ny.gov. And this is what the actual homepage looks like. So if you're doing it from the tenant side, this application can either be started by a tenant or by a landlord or by a community-based organization that is helping a tenant apply, or helping fill out these applications. But so this is what the homepage looks like. If you are a tenant, you should create what's called a tenant account. And with that tenant account, there's a requirement for both an email and a cell phone number. So you'll put in your first and last name, your email, you'll create a password, you'll confirm the password, just click that you're not a robot and accept the privacy policy, and then you'll receive an email confirming that you've created an account. You'll have to click on that email to confirm your account. Then you'll be directed to provide your phone number. You'll get a text at that phone number, and you'll put in a security code, and then you'll be good to go as far as your tenant account. So once you get in under your tenant account, you can start a new application. It used to be that you couldn't resume the application. That function was not working for about 2 months, but thankfully, as of literally the past couple days, that is working again, but only for folks that have a tenant account. So again, you need to create a tenant account. But starting a brand new application, you would click this, and then you would be brought to the first of 11 application tabs. And this is where you fill out all of your personal information. If you're doing it for a friend, if you're not doing it, if you are helping somebody out, whether you're a community-based organization or a landlord or a friend, you can put that information, and then you'll put all of your information up at the top. Name, email, phone number, contact information, address, and then below that is the applicant information, which is name, date of birth, address, I believe the social security number as well, and answering a few questions about employment status. You want to make sure that you want to make sure everything's accurate. But if you want to find your application later, it's based off of the primary applicant's date of birth and then the application number, which the application number will pop up while you are doing this application. It may be at the end, it may be after you've been working on it for a few minutes. This application takes, if you have all of your stuff together, a little over an hour. If you don't have everything together, I've had an application that I was helping someone out on that literally took 4.5 hours. So you want to make sure you have everything ready before you start. So after you fill that out, there's a second tab, which is the COVID impact tab. And it asks, if you or anyone in your household has been financially impacted due to COVID-19. Again, that's interpreted very broadly. So even if your only impact from COVID-19 was you had to buy masks, that counts. Or maybe you didn't, maybe somebody living with you had to buy masks, that counts. So you'll select if you had a decrease in income or an increase in costs or both. There's a few different options that you can choose to say whether to say how you got the decrease in income or how you got the increase in costs. After that, it asks a few other questions, and just answer everything truthfully. And then we'll go on to the third tab, which asks about household members, and that asks how many folks are actually living in the apartment or wherever it happens to be. Maybe you're renting a house, maybe you're in a mobile home and you're just renting the land that the mobile home's on. Maybe you're renting a room. All of those are allowable. And you'll put everyone that's living in there, adults and children. And you'll put all of their identifying information, first and last name, social security number, race, ethnicity, email, phone number. Obviously, if they're children, you don't have to put their email and phone number, but you do have to put their social security information if they have it. And then you'll also put if they filed for taxes with you, or if they didn't, and what their employment status is. And so you'll do that for each individual who's living in the household. Next is the household income tab. So it asks for every source of income within the household. So conceivably, one person could have more than one source of income, whether that's employment, whether that's child support, whether that's some other source of income. And you'll put that separately for each individual source of income. So not only will you put each person in the household's income, but you'll break it up by each source of income as well. It does not count public assistance as income, but it does ask if anyone's receiving public assistance. It does ask if anyone's receiving various types of government benefits. If anyone in the household's on Medicaid, if anyone's on SSI. So just fill it out as accurately as possible. It may be an awkward conversation to have with your family member or with your roommate, but you do need to actually put what everyone's income is. The next tab is the lease tab. So this just asks, is there a current lease? A lot of folks are on an expired lease. You don't have to have a current lease to qualify for ERAP, but you do need to put whether or not your lease is current. If it isn't current, just say it isn't current, and put when you or somebody in the household started paying rent, what the rental amount is. It asks how many bedrooms are in the apartment. It asks what type of apartment it is. It asks if it's in any program, so if it's rent controlled, if it's rent regulated, Section 8, Mitchell-Lama, some other sort of rent regulated apartment, or if it's not regulated at all, and you'll just check the box for that. And then you'll put whether you're renting the entire unit from the owner, whether you're renting it month to month, a yearly lease. You'll also put whether you're renting a room or whether you're renting a lot, which would probably only apply to folks in mobile homes. But again, this is a statewide application. So upstate New York, New York City, all over the state is using this. There are about 10 or 13 cities within the state of New York that are using their own ERAP form. So if you're watching this and you're in Yonkers, or if you're in, I believe, Rochester, or some towns on Long Island, you will actually be doing a different ERAP application. So, just check if you're outside of New York City. Just check to make sure that this is actually the ERAP application that you should be using. But anywhere in New York City and most of New York State is using this. So then there's the 6th tab. Again, there's 11 of them. Is the actual rental arrears tab. So this is where you put how much rent you owe. And they want it broken down by month. So it goes back to March 2020 all the way through, well, now we're up to August 2021. So you'll put what the rent was for each month. So March 2020, you'll put the March 2020 rent. August 2021, you'll put the August 2021 rent. And that's in the left column. And then here in the middle column, you will put how much rent for that particular month is still overdue. So it's not the cumulative month, it's the rent. It's not the cumulative rent, it's the rent for that specific month. And then on the right side, you'll put whatever fees are overdue. So again, one of the conditions of ERAP is that late fees are waived by the landlord. So that's a great thing, because if you have 2 years worth of late fees, then or I mean in theory 12 months worth of late fees, then you get the 12 months of late fees waived, as long as those months are approved by ERAP. And then here at the bottom, you can ask for future rent. It can be 1, 2, or 3 months of future rent. If for whatever reason you don't want help with rent in the next few months, you don't actually have to ask for it, but it's free money. I can't really think of. I'm sure there would be reasons, but it would make the most sense to just ask for 3 months of future rent. So the next tab is the utility arrears tab. It is very similar to the rental arrears tab, except probably the biggest thing is just figuring out before you start your application what your actual utility arrears were for each month. So maybe you have your paper bills going back to March 2020 of your utility bills. That's not something that I see very commonly, but that would be fantastic if you did. But if you don't, you may want to email your utility company and see if you can get a breakdown for what you owed for each month, because utilities are not like rent. Utilities are usually a different amount from month to month. So you can't just say, oh, my rent was $2,000 for the past year, so I know what it was for each of the last several months. No, you have to actually find what the actual utility amount was for each month. It breaks down electric and gas. If you're in New York City and you have Con Edison, you're going to have to actually go through your bill and see what the actual amount was for gas and what the actual amount was for electric. It asks for your account number. It asks for your utility provider. It asks for who is responsible for paying the utilities. And again, there's not a requirement that you get your utilities paid off, but if you want them paid off, this is something that you fill out. And again, you have to have at least some amount of rental arrears to be able to get up to 12 months of utility arrears paid off. So the next tab asks if you have applied for rental assistance through a different program other than ERAP. And so this is mainly to make sure that there are no double payments of rent. There are other programs out there that have been around before ERAP that can help folks with getting rent paid, and they just want to know If you've applied for any of them, maybe you haven't heard back from them, maybe you got denied from them, but they want to know if you've applied. And again, you're filling out everything to the best of your knowledge, as accurate as possible. So then the 9th tab asks how you would like to receive communications. So if there's any questions you need to answer about your application, if there's any documents you need to submit about your application, you should get contacted by the folks who are actually reviewing your application. And you can select if you want to get contacted by email, by text message, or by regular physical mail. You can also select one of 9 languages: English, Spanish, Bengali, Hebrew, I believe Arabic is one of them. And if you even need alternative formats, so like large print or Braille, that's also allowable. One thing that I should also mention is once you start your application, so there are about 8 or 9 languages that you can do your application in. But once you select a language to start off with, that is the language that your application will be in. So you can't go and change that once you've started. So just make sure, if you want it in Spanish or if you want it in Arabic, I believe Arabic is offered. I'm not 100% sure. But if you wanted one of those languages, just make sure you select that before right when you start. So then at the end, sort of at the end of the application, there's 11 tabs, but this is the 10th tab. This is what's called the applicant certification tab. There's about 10 paragraphs that you'll read through, and you'll certify that all of the information in the application is accurate. You'll also certify that that various state, local, and federal agencies can be doing checks to see what other governmental programs you're in, to see if the rent has already been paid by a different program, and just they can do various checks of not quite a background check, but sort of interagency checks, and then also that you're all right with them contacting you via text or email or whatever you put for them to contact you. And then you'll fill that out. You'll certify that it's accurate upon penalty of perjury. And that is the 10th tab. The next tab here is the document upload tab, which is a little bit separate from the main application, but all of those documents that we went over at the beginning that you need to upload for each household member, you'll do that after you submit the application, and you'll put in the application number and the primary applicant's date of birth, and then you'll have to upload those documents one at a time. They can only be PDF, JPG, JPEG, or PNG files, and they can only be 4 megabytes maximum. It takes a while to upload these because you have to do it one at a time, and it has to be the right file format, but you do need to do this, and it makes things easier if you do it right after you submit your application. Also, you will want, if you have created a tenant account, you'll want to do what's called associating the application with your tenant account. So you can actually go into, once you're signed in with your tenant account, you can click on your name in the top right corner, and then click on your what's called account information, and it'll let you put in this application number and date of birth. You'll click on that, it'll pop up, the information will pop up, and then you'll click on the button to associate it with your account, and then your account will be tied to that application. So if you want to check the status of your application, you can go to this link, nysrenthhelp.otda.ny.gov/en/tools/check-application-status, and then you type in your application number and your date of birth, and it will tell you the status of your application. Again, there is this New York State hotline 1-844-NY1-RENT. That's 1-844-691-7368. It's open Monday through Saturday, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. So that's every day except Sunday, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Give them a call if you need help with any questions you have for your application, and they should be able to assist you with answering those questions. Similar to the tenant account, there's a landlord account. Landlords are actually required to create their own account, and so you'll click on this link here, and you'll create your own account. There has to be a separate email for each different account, for each different entity. If you own multiple buildings and they're all under different entities, you're going to need different accounts, I believe, for each entity. And then once you create that account, you'll need to upload your W-9 form, direct deposit form, and you'll actually need to associate the tenant, the completed application with your landlord account as well, and then upload whatever relevant documents are required to that account to that application as well. You'll need the application number. It helps to have the primary tenant's date of birth as well. And again, there is a requirement for the landlord to submit those documents. Again, if you're uploading documents, you're going to have to type in the application number and the owner number. The owner number is going to be a number that's generated for the landlord after they create a landlord account. Again, PDF, JPG, JPEG, or PNG file types, 4 megabyte max, and uploading the documents one at a time. Landlords also have to confirm that the rental amount is, they have to upload this document that shows what the regular monthly rent is, what the amount past due is, what the prospective rent amount is for future months. They'll put the tenant name, the address, total arrears owed, total prospective amount, sign, date, and put the landlord's name. And so that's the application part. I'm going to go over a few questions really quickly, just as far as showing, who is actually eligible for this. So again, based out here in the Bronx, Aaron Judge made $10 million last year playing for the Yankees. He spent all of his money on Dogecoin and cryptocurrency and stopped paying his rent because he heard there's money coming from the government to pay everyone's rental arrears. This did not actually happen with Aaron Judge, but this is an example. If this had actually happened, would Mr. Judge be eligible for the ERAP program? No, he would not, because $10 million is well over 80% of the area median income. So it does actually matter how much money your household makes. There are folks that are going to be over the income limit. Sample problem number 2, Maria is a single adult undocumented immigrant who is an essential worker and worked all the way through the pandemic, but had her hours cut and lost income as a result. Her annual pay for last year was $15,000. She's always been paid in cash. She has an active non-payment eviction case due to arrears. Does she qualify for ERAP? The answer here is yes. One thing I was trying to highlight in this question is that ERAP does not care about your immigration status. And even though she never lost her job, she did lose income because she had her hours cut. So that counts as a reduction in income. And if she was in that first 30 days, having an active non-payment eviction case and having her income be $15,000 actually would put her in the top priority category for her income. If she's been getting paid in cash and can't find tax documents or pay stubs, she would probably have to complete a self-attestation for her income. So then going on to the next sample problem, Ozzy lost his job at a meatpacking plant in 2019, so before the March 2020 date. He's never filed for unemployment. He hasn't had any income since 2019 and hasn't paid any rent since 2019. His arrears are now $30,000. Does he qualify for ERAP? And the answer is probably yes. So he may not have lost any income due to COVID because he didn't have any income before COVID, but he's probably had an increase in costs if he had to buy PPE, or if increase in food costs, increase in essential items, whatever other type of increase in costs. Now he may need to do a self-attestation that states that he did have an increase in costs, but if that happens, he would probably qualify for ERAP. Now, if he hasn't paid any rent since before March 2020, ERAP would not cover whatever rental arrears he has before March 2020. It would cover at the most 12 months of rental arrears since March 2020, but he should go ahead and apply for ERAP as well. And then the last question, John is a single parent of 2 minor children, was laid off in April 2020 and was unemployed for about 2 months, but has been employed for over a year. He has a household income. He has an income of $80,000 for a household of 3, $2,000 in rental arrears. Does John qualify for ERAP? The answer here is yes, because $80,000 for a family of 3 is below the 80% AMI. 80% AMI for a family of 3 in the Bronx and in the rest of New York City is $85,950. So again, even if you're making good money, making $80,000, what matters is the 80% AMI. So you got to actually check. Someone would have to actually check that AMI, and if it's under 80%, then that is fine. So again, if you want to apply for ERAP, you go to nysrenthelp.otda.ny.gov. Those 80% and 50% AMI charts are available. Probably the easiest is to Google them, but they're also on OTDA's website. And finally, if you need any assistance with ERAP applications, if you're in the Bronx, BronxWorks and a few of our organizations that we're working with are actually helping out with application assistance. So you can call 844-380-9169, and that's a hotline that you can leave your information at. And I believe it's after hours right now, but there's a voicemail that's set up. Also, you can go to bxran.org. That's bxran.org, and put in your information. And so that's for folks in the Bronx. There's also another application assistance provider called NICA. Their number's on the screen as well. And each borough in New York City has organizations that are assisting with applications. You can go to HRA's website, and there will be a list of those organizations. But again, bxran.org, and in the Bronx, we'll get you set up with folks that can help you with application assistance if you're in the Bronx. And so that is the end of our slideshow here. So go ahead and I'll go ahead and open it up for questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Jordan, for that very thorough presentation. Before we start with any questions, I'd like to introduce Mr. Muhammad Mada, who's one of the partners for today's presentation. Mr. Mada is the chairman of the African Advisory Council of the Bronx Borough President's Office, as well as the president of Africans Help Desk. Mr. Mada, if you wouldn't mind saying some remarks. You are on mute. Okay.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Mona. And thank you, Jordan, for the presentation. It just seemed like every time I see or hear this presentation, I learn something new. So this is great. I think this is my second or third era presentation with Jordan, and as always, it's great. So I just want to thank Bronx Works and all the work that they've been doing. I know I've been referring community members to Bronx Works for the since ERAP started, and so far I think everyone, I've been getting some very, very positive feedback. So keep up the good work, and thank you, Mona, for putting this together. That's really all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mata. And I'd also like to introduce one of our African Matters board members, Mr. Sadio Barry.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mona. Marda, it's a pleasure to see you again. Jordan, thank you for your time. Thank you for your presentation. It was very, very, very excellent and professional. I really appreciate it. As Mona said, I am board member of African Matters. Today is August 11. We're having our first event, and you're the one who do that presentation. That I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And just to let you know, this is the beginning of everything we are dedicated. We are engaged and committed to do for our community, especially African community all over the United States of America. When I heard you on your presentation, I do have some question about it, because I am part of the African community. When I heard people complaining about this application, you must show your social security card or the application doesn't gonna go through. And as I know my experience, social security, most of the companies or employer, they're looking for the number, the 9 numbers, if they're good or not. But if people saying they need to have the card to scan it and to send it to the ERAP, I just want to know if that is true or not. And also, even you claiming your children, they're asking their social security card. So I don't know if that's true or not, Jordan.
So you do have to actually submit your social security number, but there isn't a requirement to submit your social security card. So, you know, if you lost your social security card, or if you know, for whatever reason, don't want to submit your social security card, you are actually able to quite literally write down your social security number on a piece of paper and upload that. And if somebody doesn't have a social security number, that's fine. As long as they literally do not have a number. They've never been assigned a number. Those people would not have to submit their social security number. But if you have one, you do have to submit it. And maybe you forgot it. Maybe it's going to take some digging to find what that number is. But and maybe it's for your kid. Maybe your kid is literally a month or two old. They would still have to have their social security number submitted, but not necessarily the card.
But without sending the card, the application doesn't gonna go through. They're not gonna accept it. That's my concern.
So without the card, you don't have to submit the card. Without the number, it might not go through. You would a tenant applicant would more than likely be asked to provide the social security number. Now, if somebody in the household does not have a social security number because they were never given one, all they would have to put is that they don't have a social security number, and that's perfectly fine. But is only that everyone who has a social security number provide what their social security number is. But yeah, there's no requirement to provide the actual card.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mona.
Okay, I have a question, Gordon. A couple of people have come to me and said that they want to apply, but they've spoken to their landlord, and their landlord is refusing to assist them in getting the funds. The landlord doesn't want to be helpful because the landlord wants them out. So in cases like that, what can tenants do?
So that's pretty common. But the tenant can go ahead and apply for ERAP anyway. Their landlord is not going to get the money from ERAP if they don't send in the documents that are required from the landlord side. But the tenant can go ahead and apply anyway, and they'll get what's called a conditional approval, assuming everything is accurate from the tenant's side, and assuming that their application would have been approved. And with that conditional approval, that will be a letter, and they can go ahead and not only can they should go ahead and print that out. They should also print out a confirmation email that they receive from when they submit the application, and they should also have written documentation that they have reached out to their landlord and told them their application number and that the landlord needed to submit their side of things. And if all of that happens, if the landlord tries to take them to housing court, or maybe they're already in housing court, they can show all of that to the judge. If they're in New York City, I believe currently just about everywhere in New York City has what's called right to counsel in eviction cases. So they should get all of those documents that I just said, give it to whoever their attorney is going to be, and their attorney can literally show the court that the only reason that the landlord didn't get paid for those months is because they refused to accept payment, or they refused to work with the tenant on the application. And that can be a defense for those months. So, they're not going to get an actual full approval, but the landlord is going to be deemed to have waived rent for however many months would have been approved by ERAP. Okay.
Well, that's good to know, and I'll make sure to share that information because I'm sure that that's very helpful, that they can still go ahead and continue and apply. So, Jordan, again, thank you so very much to you and BronxWorks for joining us today and conducting this presentation. The presentation will be available for replay on our Facebook page, as well as on our website at africanmatters.org and our Facebook page at African Matters NY. I want to thank Mr. Mata and Mr. Barry for joining us today, and we look forward to organizing more workshops in the coming weeks, including for parents of students with special needs, as well as our college preparation and FAFSA application workshops for parents and families. It's that time of the year. And also our workshops on the high school, the New York City high school admissions process, as well as the specialized high school admissions process and gifted and talented. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Jordan, thank you so very much for this very thorough and informative presentation. Everyone, be safe and be well. Thank you.
Thank you.